Welcome back. In this module, we're going to talk about synthesizing ideas, chapter 12 of your textbook. And synthesizing is the word that we use in the writing process to talk about putting things together, things that are different together, or taking things that are the same or similar and putting them together in a way that shows how they're different. And really, synthesizing is usually what we mean by thinking, because there aren't that many original ideas in the world. There have been a few people who've had original thoughts that nobody else has ever had before, but pretty much the ideas have all been had. But the combinations haven't, and that's where the real activity of using your critical thinking skills begins, is with bringing things together in ways that are different, that are new, that are original, and that teach you something. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, a well-known English poet who wrote things like The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, believed that the beginning of creativity was the triangle. You could take a line, the distance between 2 points, and the line is going to look the same no matter where you put it, no matter where the 2 points are. There's only one kind of line in the world. The only thing that can be different is length. But there can be all kinds of different kinds of triangles. They can be equal, and they can be parallel, and they can be not parallel. And the triangle, because it's combining three things together, allows infinite possibilities for the kind of thing that it can be. And that's about the size of it. Synthesizing ideas, learning how to synthesize or to pull together different ideas, is the beginning point of being a creative writer or a critical thinker. And the primary vehicle for doing this that we're going to be talking about in this unit is the comparison contrast paper. So an example of what I mean, take what has probably become the best-selling and most popular gadget of all time, the Apple iPhone, now on its 5th generation. Remember when the iPhone came out in 2007? It was a combination of technologies that already existed. Cell phone, the MP3 player, the camera, various other bells and whistles, all of these had been in place for years, and really anybody could have made the combination who had thought to do it. But it's not any of those items that became the best-selling gadget of all time. It's the combination of everything that was put together into one unit, and a lot of brand marketing and a lot of arrangements with cell phone companies. But this is the same idea, really, that works for papers. Having an original idea usually means combining unoriginal ideas in new ways. And the vehicle for doing this, or at least the best vehicle for teaching you how to do this, is what paper number 3 is, and that is a comparison and contrast paper. And what I'd like to do just for the next few minutes is talk about some of the conventions of that kind of paper to help you on the assignment that you have. Lots of people say that you can't compare apples to oranges. Of course you can compare apples to oranges. There are all sorts of ways to compare them. They're alike in a lot of ways. They're both fruits. They're both sweet. They both taste good in salads with bananas. They're unlike in a lot of ways. One's red, one's orange. One has a skin that you can't eat, and one has a skin that you can. One can be grown in cold climates. One requires a climate that never freezes over. So there are plenty of ways to compare apples to oranges, apples to bananas, or for that matter, apples to the French Revolution. You can compare anything to anything, but you need to observe a few rules if you're going to make that a good paper. First of all, select one thing to compare, a single point of comparison. Otherwise, you just create a laundry list. Apples are A, B, C, D, oranges are A, B, C, D, and you haven't added to the sum total of knowledge in the human world. And that's a pretty tall order anyway, but if you're going to add something to knowledge, if you're going to create something that is interesting and that people want to read and that instructors want to give good grades to, look at a single point of comparison. Don't try to be exhaustive. Don't try to make your comparison say everything, and avoid saying what is obvious. Apples are red, oranges are orange. So what? That's a point of a comparison. It's not particularly interesting. It's very, very obvious. One way to avoid being obvious is to work against the expectations. If it's clear that two things are similar, talk about how they're different. If it's clear that two things are very different, talk about how they are similar. Look for a comparison that's not going to be obvious. I know that we have talked about this before, that not being obvious is one of the things that is a hallmark of most good papers. But if you're comparing a book to a movie that's made out of the same material, talk about how they're different. Don't talk about the things they do that are exactly the same, because that's what's easy to understand. That's what's obvious. So look at what you're comparing, and you have to decide right off the bat if you're going to compare or talk about the similarities, or if you're going to contrast and talk about the differences. And your rule of thumb should be, if it's obvious that they're similar, talk about the differences. If it's obvious that they're different, talk about the similarities. And if you can get to the underlying assumptions of a piece of writing or a movie or a piece of artwork, rather than talking about what's above the surface, see if you can go beneath the surface. Talk about the things you are comparing assume to be true. Because whenever you can get to and talk about underlying assumptions, you're dramatically reducing the risk that you're going to make a point that is obvious or uninteresting. Okay, let's try an example. I have asked you for your paper to look at 5 different paintings of a mother and a child, and to take 3 of those and do some comparing and contrasting about what attitude the artist has, or what is the artist trying to say about motherhood or childhood, or the relationship between the mother and the child. And I didn't put this specifically in the text, but the mother with child painting is one of the oldest forms of art in the Christian world. And it comes from the medieval era, when almost every artist painted a Madonna with a child, a picture of Mary with the Christ child. And there are thousands of Madonna and child paintings out there. The one on the left actually was in the first edition of Reading the World, and I took it out for a variety of reasons, but it comes from somewhere in the 13th century from an anonymous artist in Crete. And the one on the right is not a medieval painting, it's a Renaissance painting by a very famous artist named Fra Lippo Lippi, who was a monk, was also very secular for a monk, and was one of the first artists to use the tools of perspective and depth and color that became so standard during the Renaissance and remain standard today. If you look at these 2 pictures, and I asked you to compare and contrast them, you could go several different ways. You could talk about what is similar about them. Well, they're both pictures of a mother and a child. That's true. They are both, in fact, pictures of Mary and the baby Jesus. That's true. Neither one of those are particularly interesting. There are some superficial differences too. One of them is primarily yellow, and one of them is primarily brown. That's a difference. It's not a terribly important difference. There are other differences that are a little bit more profound. One of them is very content being 2-dimensional. One of them uses perspective and line in such a way as to try to create 3 dimensions. One of them has a child who looks like a little adult. One of them has a child who looks like a child. One of them has a child who's wearing rich robes and rich clothing. One of them has a child who's naked from the waist down. One of them is intentionally supernatural. It has a variety of angelic figures and looks like something that that does not exist in the world. The other one takes pains to be naturalistic, to present no supernatural elements, and to make it appear that this occurred in a place. So all of these are differences. And from which of those differences could you draw some plausible explanations of the underlying ideas in each painting? Could you say that one of these paintings presents Christ as a figure who was never human, and one of them presents Christ as a figure who was once very human? Can you talk about the fact that one of them has a Christ who's looking away from the mother, and seems to be oblivious to her, and one of them has a Christ who is hugging the mother and seems to be very attracted to her, or at least wanting to be with her. I mean, these are differences that if you look at them deeply enough, you can find differences in religion, differences in emphasis, differences in life philosophy that are all reflected in the paintings. And that's the kind of analysis I want you to do on 3 of the 5 mother-child images in the textbook that you have for your assignment. Look at one thing. If I were doing these 2 paintings, I might focus on something like the fact that one of them takes pains to be supernatural, one of them takes pains to be natural, and the difference between the supernatural and the natural reflects the artist's view of the role of religion in society. Now, that would be kind of a thesis statement, and that would allow me to talk about a number of the techniques that the artists use in order to convey both a supernatural or a very natural worldview. Ultimately, a good comparison and contrast paper does what a good paper does generally, and that is it teaches you, the writer, something. To write a good paper means that you're going to keep going until you have discovered something, learned something, thought about something in a new way, because just as a general rule, if you can't interest yourself for 4 to 6 pages, you aren't going to be able to interest me or another teacher or another reader. And that's no guarantee that if you do interest yourself, anybody else is going to be interested. All of us are capable of amusing ourselves in ways that nobody else finds particularly amusing. But it's just a guarantee that if you bore yourself, you will bore your reader. So what I'm trying to get you to do with these comparison papers is keep going. Reject the easy ideas that come. If you read chapter 12, there is some discussion of what makes a good comparison contrast paper about art beyond what we've already talked about. And I do deal with some of the mother and child paintings, and you're welcome to use that information in there. That's not embargoed information. But what I want you to do is keep thinking about it, keep writing about it until you can come up with a paper idea that you feel you could not have written until you started thinking about it. So that the thinking that you've done about the paper is creating something in the paper that is going to be an educational experience, because that's what papers are supposed to be. I'm not just asking you to do this so I can have something to grade. The idea of thinking about what you're going to write about means that you are learning something new about the world, and you're discovering that you have the ability, through the proper combination of different ideas, to say something new about the world that we live in. And really, that's what this whole course is about. Learning that you have the power to invent, create, and discover ideas that have never been discovered before, that you can't even find on Wikipedia. And that you can do this largely by taking what is already known and coming up with a way to combine it into something that is uniquely your own. Now, for the bulletin board, since there hasn't been much discussion on the bulletin board this week, I want you to keep talking about the question of Buddhism and science that both the first video of this week and the universe in a grain of sand are about. And I want everyone to post at least twice on that topic by the end of the week. So thank you very much, and I will see you on Sunday. Bye-bye.